What if all the rich, diverse journeys of our souls are how God explores the universe as us? And what if we awaken to that? What then? Come join us as we open the door to all the adventures of being human in these times on this beautiful planet we call home. Hi, Seven and I would like to welcome you to the show today for a scintillating interview on the importance of self-love with author Sumaya Sterling O'Grady, who's a friend of ours, and she's also an amazing person who's been a spiritual seeker her entire life, done things that almost no one does, and she's and had many insights and realizations, which we've heard many of them ourselves, and that's why we've invited her onto the show. So Samaya has recently just completed a book called Confessions of a Starseed: My Crazy Journey Toward Enlightenment. So it's a memoir and it goes all around the world. You know, it goes into Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and she practices Buddhism and Sufism and does all kinds of things, has outlandish experiences and funny mishaps and so forth. I'm really looking forward to reading it. And she says it has her encounters with spiritual teachers, the good, the bad, the ugly, and you'll get the intimate details. So if you want the dirt, I think it's right here. Yeah. So she's also written some chapters in some previous anthologies, and she's presented numerous inspirational talks and meditations at workshops and conferences in San Francisco and here in Sedona, where we all live in this area, and has a master's degree in counseling psychology, has worked for years with troubled youth and families and developmentally disabled adults, and has worked in many other areas as well. Is a lifelong fan of sci-fi and even spine-chilling murder mysteries. Is this what we're in, a murder mystery? So Samaya, before the show, you were saying a bit about how the theme of your book is really self-love. And that's been the real lesson that you've learned in your life. Can you tell us how you understand self-love?
Yes, I think the real secret in the beginning is to know that there is such a thing as self-love, that it's a thing that's important for people to have. And I didn't know that it was missing because you don't know when things are missing, you know? You can't tell unless it's something you had and then lost. But if you haven't had it, you don't know. So my book was really along with all of my adventures and great insights and weird things that happened along the way, it was also about my coming to terms with the fact that such a thing as self-love exists and that I didn't have any. And then how that showed up in my life that I didn't, and then what changed as time passed and I began to see it as, a super important thing for me to pay attention to. So for self-love, it's really about seeing yourself as a person who's worthy of all good things and seeing yourself as someone who deserves love and who can give love and receive love. I think that's really a bottom line. It's about worthiness and giving and receiving. Without that, we become a closed system, and that's never good for a human being. It's like our cells in our body need to be open to receive and to send, and that's how we're designed. A lot of people at an earlier time maybe thought that self-love was about being grandiose and being narcissistic, excluding other people to
Right.
as being better, I'm better than you, that kind of thing. And but that's just the opposite. That's narcissism. And self-love has nothing to do with that. They're not even in the same, book, you might say. So I think now most people realize that self-love is very different than that, but I just wanted to say up front that self-love is a deep energy that comes from within your heart and your soul, and it's really the inner light of your being is
Mm,
self-love. It's we there are many spiritual traditions that talk about divine love, but actually divine love and self-love are only in my view, with all of my strange background, I see it as the same, that there really isn't a separation. If truly being in separation from the ultimate divine is an illusion. And I think many of us on the spiritual path, at least, have come to terms with that. We know that, even though it's a very compelling illusion, feeling separate.
mhm.
However, it is an illusion. And if we as divine beings are made of love, then how can we separate ourselves off as not having self-love or not recognizing it or not experiencing it? It really is our light source that within our own beings. That's how I'm seeing it.
It
That's,
sounds like it's really from the self with a capital S, like what
yeah,
Maharshi spoke of, the self, as opposed to the little self, the ego self, or the what we
right,
think we are, which is where when people are narcissistic and self-absorbed, it seems like they're more trying to build up that ego.
right, right. And
I was thinking that that when they're narcissistic, they're closing other people off and
right.
making themselves the
Hmm.
thing, and other people are outside of that.
Hmm. That's
Hmm.
true. That's true.
And
Whereas with
self-love sounds like it's
mhm,
doing that too, because it's myself that I love. Love
mhm,
myself, but
yeah,
actually, it's something different than that, right? Because you're
yeah,
opening, you're including yourself with everything else, maybe
yeah. That's it's a
something like
very
that.
inclusive experience because if you really love yourself, um, then you're really then in alignment with that deeper light within, that soul light, whatever people want to call it, the higher self, the soul, it's been called different things. That means you're in aligned with that as opposed to being cut off from that. And people who really have a lot of self-hate feel the sense of separation far more keenly, and it's very painful. I've done a lot of healing work with other people as well as on with myself, and I know a lot of healers, and one thing that many of us see is that at the bottom of a lot of emotional pain, it's the lack of self-love.
Hmm.
I would agree. And how would you work with someone who doesn't have any self-love, who doesn't know what that is, who are just experiences the inner self as some kind of a black hole and that can't even hardly see any light?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's a longer road. It's not a quick fix.
Mm.
But because when someone's in that kind of a condition, it's a fragile condition. And we need to take it slowly and lovingly and just give them some step by step experiences, or direction. You can't rush self-love. It is a journey, and because our culture is so based on competitiveness and measuring yourself against other people, and like, oh, they have a better singing voice than me, and then feeling bad about yourself, or they have a better car or whatever. We all know these stories. Many of us have unfortunately gotten stuck in them. I certainly did at a point in my life. A person who has absolutely no self-love, usually what happens without self-love, a person engages in a lot of negative self-talk, and they are always beating themselves up for their mistakes, for their shortcomings. There's really no end to this. If you want to beat yourself up, there are a million subjects that you can find to do it on. How you look, whatever little failure you've had that seems to be bigger, all those kinds of things. Negative self-talk can take over. And it's very toxic. It's like drinking poison instead of drinking Amrita,
Yeah,
or
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And so that's to me one of the first things that I would work with somebody. I mean, I have to talk to them and assess, what happened and what's going on in their life. There's no real formula. But I know that negative self-talk is one of the ways that people can just dig themselves into a deep, dark pit. And then once you're at the bottom of the pit, it's very hard to get out.
You're saying that they're very fragile, and I'm thinking that that means that they've been wounded, they're traumatized, and it made me think that when they're born, they have self-love, or
Yeah.
do they have self-love when they're born, and then it's kind of beaten out of them through experience, or what do you?
Because of my spiritual training, I do believe that we are born in love, that we are. Although I also know that, in between lives, I believe that we have this option to meet with our guides and say, well, these are the challenges I've had, and here's what else I want to take on to learn. And then you make these decisions. And of course, you get here, you've lost your memory about what you decided, and it feels really terrible that you're in this situation.
What a game, huh?
Yeah.
And so some of this that people come in with a lot of physical difficulties, mental difficulties. I've been working with autistic kids, and they really have a harder road to hoe than I had, even though they had loving parents and I had loving parents. And so there is that level of complexity. Now, I know not everybody here who's watching this might believe that we have these options in between lives, but nonetheless, we do come into different situations. And I think that self-love is always the bottom line, the beginning. But if the parents are stressed out and unhappy and they're abusive, it can really then cause the self-love to get very covered up. I think of it as self-love as being the light source within us. Just love. Love in general is our basic being that we come in with. However, when bad things happen and people are told repeatedly that they aren't worthy, that they're flawed, there's something wrong with them, we all know that this happens to people. I have friends that has happened to. It's like a veil covers over that light. And
It's
then
like clouds over the sun.
yeah, exactly. And then every negative word that they hear from their parents is a further veil. And pretty soon, the veil, it's like a light source having cloths covering it. Pretty soon you can't see the light source. And when this happens to a person, they lose contact with that love within them. I had a very close friend who was an alcoholic for over 30 years. And she pretty much destroyed her life repeatedly because she grew up in that kind of environment. And finally, when through the grace of the divine, she got sober and began to come to terms with what happened. And her parents were so mean and negative to her all the time that she absorbed it, believed it, and then thought she was worthless and, why not just drink? And so finally, through AA, she began to understand that the reason her parents were so mean and nasty in what they said to her, because that's how they felt about themselves.
It always comes down to that, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's very hard to be loving to someone if you can't see any love in yourself. If you hate yourself, then that's what you have to give out.
It's an intergenerational thing, and it's also an intercultural thing. It's very big for humanity, and it
Yeah.
seems like we're in a time where maybe it's beginning to take a shift, and people are actually talking like you are talking here today, And that's very encouraging also.
Yeah.
Healing work being done. How would a person know that they don't have self-love? How would it even occur to them?
If they're lucky, they have someone they trust who can reflect that back to them. But I wasn't that lucky, and I had to find it out the hard way by being unhappy and depressed, and for a long time, off and on. It didn't stop me from having all these adventures that I had in my life. However, uh, that was my saving grace, I guess. I think that how they would discover it is if someone if they were maybe talking to somebody and someone noticed it, realized that they were indulging in a lot of negative thoughts and would gradually begin to mention it to them. Or if these days, we know a lot about self-love. It's all over the internet. If anybody wants to learn about it, they can just, Google it. And there's a ton of really good things online that can help somebody recognize, that they have it or don't have it and what to do about that.
First step might be to like know that it's a thing, that it exists. That
Right.
some people don't have self-love. And what does that mean? What does self-love even mean?
Yeah.
You'd have to do that, and then it would start to make sense. I first encountered the idea of self-love and not having self-love from reading spiritual teachings. And it
Yes.
mentioned that. And I was like, that's interesting. I'd never thought of it before.
Yes. Finding out it's a thing, really.
Yeah.
We're more likely to make that discovery now than we were like 40 years ago or 50 years ago when I started my journey,
I agree. Yeah, in fact, I was 2 years into a spiritual path with a bunch of yoga teachings and all that before I even heard anyone use the word ego. And then once it got the word ego, then oh, what's that? That sounds kind of bad, and then it took a while to kind of, to get to that idea of self-love, even, self-acceptance, yes, but self-love.
It starts with
Yes.
self-acceptance, I think. I mean, I think that's an initial step. It's not like you discover it and poof, it's full blown and right there. It's like easing yourself into a swimming pool step by step,
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Some people are divers, but some are waders.
yes, right. I was always the kind that just dove in,
Oh, yeah.
but self-love was a little too mysterious. I just had no idea. I think it began to open up for me when I was on the Sufi path. And that was 2 chapters in my book about that. The path of the Sufi is all about seeing Allah, who's just another name for God. It's not a separate God or anything like that, but to see Allah as being the beloved and then wanting to become one with the beloved, to unite into that. And so that always sounded really good to me because I had been on this journey for a long time and I'd begun to realize that I was missing something big. And, the Buddhists talk about compassion and loving kindness for the self. And so that was a really good start. I consider that a very important start. So you don't have to be a Sufi. You don't have to buy into a particular religion. However, it was just how I became aware of it. And I think being on the spiritual path, it was like it was in my face enough to where I finally began to realize.
There is a Buddhist meditation that really profoundly impacted me. That's something like this. It always starts with oneself. May I be happy. May all beings be happy. May I be well. May all beings be well. May I be safe. May all beings be safe. It's really quite profound. It begins within and is an inclusiveness like we were talking about.
Yes.
It's a beautiful sentiment.
Yes, it is. I I did begin to get an inkling about self-love because of being a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, and also my teacher brought through the Shambhala teachings. And so Shambhala training was a big part of what I did. And it's a non-sectarian approach to living an uplifted life and connecting with the upliftedness in your own being and in your surroundings. And it was a very powerful experience. And I think that took me a long way. So by the time I was a Sufi, I was softened up.
So you started with the Buddhist part first.
Yeah, I think it did. The Buddhists and the Shambhala teachings.
And you were raised Catholic, right? I mean, also.
Oh, that was the worst of all, honestly. It's not like I'm not dissing Catholicism in general, but the way it was taught to me as a child in that Catholic school, kindergarten through 9, was really negative. It was all about sin and guilt. And if you died with sin on your soul, you're going to go to hell for eternal amount of time. And I thought, this was terrifying as an innocent child. And then to learn that I didn't have any hope anyway, because I was born with the original sin.
Yeah, you're going to hell.
Really?
And if you question your beliefs, for sure you're going to hell.
Going to hell. Yeah, that was part of the deal. Now, in other traditions in Judaism, people are encouraged to question. But in the way that I was taught Catholicism, it may be different now, but the way I was taught, you weren't allowed to question. And of course, I'm the person who questions everything. And so, this was really tough.
Yeah. So you have said that forgiveness is a big part of self-love too.
Yes.
What's so important about forgiveness, would you say?
Well, and I discovered this for myself the hard way. And since I've worked with a lot of people on these issues, it's pretty universal that one of the reasons people hate themselves, and I mean not just a lack of self-love, but out and out hate, is because they feel that they have made so many mistakes and they can't quite release that. They can't recover from the mistakes. And then they know they've hurt other people. And so the other people is just that it becomes a big collection of resentment toward yourself and toward other people. I mean, it works, it kind of faces both ways. And that's often a source of self-hate, is reflecting on, oh, I messed this up, I failed this, I made this terrible decision that ruined my life, and on and on. There's really no end to it. By the time you get to be a certain age, there's been quite a collection of these toxic, what would we call them? Toxic thought forms, maybe. And so clearing resentment, which is the first step into forgiveness, clearing resentment, it's where I often start. I found that when I was living in California and I was an entrepreneur, and this was one of the ways that I worked with people, if somebody said to me, well, what do you do? And I would say something about helping people experience self-love, and what would happen is that people's eyes would glaze over and they would step back. It was really weird.
Yeah.
They didn't know what you meant.
Yeah.
I think that actually it pointed toward a wound, unconsciously.
Tell us more about that. How do you see that, the wounding part of it?
Well, I think not having love in your life is a deep wound, whether it's from, a mate or friends or love for yourself. That the lack of love is one of the deepest wounds that we suffer from. And I really do feel that the lack of self-love and the lack of love in your life are integrally related. If you have self-love, people are attracted to that. And you end up with a pack of friends, a pack of really great friends, all of who understand that self-love is important, even if they haven't thought about it in those terms.
And when I saw the idea of self-love and the idea of forgiveness, there's this idea that you can't forgive others until you forgive yourself, and that you can't love others until you love yourself. That's one of the ideas that I keep encountering.
I think that's true for some people, but for other people, it works the other way around. And for me, it was always about forgiving myself. And then it was easier to forgive other people. And I'll come back to that because that's a process. It's, you don't just snap your fingers. If something really hurt you deeply, it's a process. However, I for a while was using the violet flame for forgiveness, and I had a whole program regarding how to do that. And I was teaching that online on my Zoom class, and some people said that really they had to forgive the other people in their life, like they were in a bad marriage and they got a divorce, and they had to forgive the husband first before they could even get to themselves. And then other people said just the opposite. So I think it just depends on, how you're wired.
That's interesting. Do you think it has to do maybe also with severity of harm done? Like if you were more the perp or they were more the perp, so to speak, or that's how you perceived it, I guess.
Yes, well, the one person I'm thinking of was the husband was the perpetrator and she was more in the victim role. And when they got divorced and she began to wake up to what was going on in their marriage and to, do self-reflection about it, she realized she couldn't go further until she forgave him and released that burden on her heart. As long as she was carrying it, it was like an occlusion, it was covering up other things that needed to be opened. So that was her process. And so I do think for me, it was always about my own situation. And then once I had the beginnings of self-love, it was so much easier to forgive other people.
And it
Because
wasn't like you had done a lot of things in your life that I don't imagine that were really so horrible that you needed to forgive yourself that much. But yet somehow you're saying it did begin for you with
Well, I
forgiving
made a
yourself.
lot of mistakes and choices that I made, and I
Oh.
didn't carry on about that in my book. I wanted the book to be an exploration of my journey toward enlightenment and all the bumps along the way, all the blessings and the bumps that I suffered along the way, because it is a bumpy road. I likened it to being in the desert and being thirsty, and there's nothing but cactuses, but they're prickly, you
Oh,
know.
oh, wow.
That's
Yeah.
sometimes what the spiritual path is like.
Wow. You went at the spiritual path with more fervor and more dedication than I think anybody I know, from what I've heard of your story and what I know of you. And you went abroad, you went far, you stayed for many years with certain groups and you had a number of teachers and all that. Would you care to expand on any of that?
Um, well, I mean, I could go into all of that. However, I'm not sure it would serve our subject for me to do that. Yeah. I might just
Look.
mention it here and there. I think, I mentioned the Buddhist and the Sufis because that was the beginning for me. The Buddhism, the cornerstone of Buddhism is compassion. And I think that self-compassion is like the beginning of self-love. It's when you open up to think, I don't have to beat myself up for this mistake. I realize I did the best I could. That's the beginning of self-compassion.
Mhm.
But if a person is continuing to flagellate themselves, there are these people in Spain called the flagellantes, and there's an annual parade, and there are these men who take off their shirts and they have these whips and they go
Oh,
like that, and their backs are bloody messes by the end of the parade. It's some kind of a religious thing, which I can't comprehend. And
Yeah,
so,
it is hard to understand. It seems like for a lot of people, it comes out in ways, I think, in our society that are so subtle that we don't think of it as that. For example, it seems to me like a lot of people, and I can put myself in this category, have kind of the idea that if we work hard, we accomplish something, we achieve something, then we're worthy of love or existence. And, it doesn't feel like it's self-hate. It just feels like, but in a way, it's not, it's a lack of self-love because other people will be perfectly content to just enjoy life and
yeah.
get that massage and, go on that vacation and, and do all those things. And so do you think that's ties in with it too, the work ethic, the busyness of so many in our culture?
Well, I think the drama of being busy is a good way to hide from all of this and to never face yourself, to never confront yourself or the wounds that are there. The more the wound begins to weep, the more busy a person becomes. It's an addiction. And
Mhm.
there is actually Workaholics Anonymous. They recognize this.
Mhm.
I've seen this happen. Um, and then people are driven, of course, by these false values that you have to make money, you have to have
Mhm.
great cars and a big house. And if you don't, you're not worthy.
And we worship celebrities and people who,
Yeah.
great musicians and artists and
Mhm.
writers and businessmen or whatever, politicians. We have this kind of worship of people that accomplish a lot. And so I think at some level that makes many of us feel kind of like we're inadequate and or like it can come out to body stuff too. Like you see someone that's really beautiful and
Mhm.
like for
Mhm.
women that's especially true. You see all these,
Slender, you have to be
yeah, you
slender.
have to be perfect.
Yeah, have a nice figure, beautiful skin, and hair.
Right.
Yeah, it's terrible. I know men get that too, but women get it like I think even more.
Mhm.
I don't know, you could speak to that, Seven. You grew up as a guy, so
Thinking about allowance, learning to allow yourself to make new choices.
Mhm.
Choosing again is a thing. So if I make a choice, I don't know, am I totally sidestepping your question? I don't know. But when I make a choice that then I regret and I feel bad about, I can let myself choose again. Just let my forgiveness is like saying, okay, well, do something else,
You did your best.
and just do something different. I can choose again. I don't have to hang on to carry an anchor around that's this thing that I remember. I don't have to do that. I can just
Yeah.
let myself make new choices,
Mhm.
and that it's okay if I learn something before by making a different kind of choice.
Mhm.
And it's not bad. It's just the way things go.
But
And I feel like that's forgiveness.
it is. It's forgiveness in that you have self-love. You
Mhm.
do. You have it. And
Mhm.
I noticed that about you because I have a self-love antenna, I guess, having been on this difficult journey for a long time. And, you kind of radiate this sort of inclusiveness. And I don't know what your personal journey has been, but I think the reason you're able to be self-forgiving if you make a choice that didn't turn out well, that obviously you have a core of self-love somewhere in your being.
Mhm. Yeah,
What
I
do
guess I guess I do, and I and it wasn't always there. I used to feel
you?
guilty and
Mhm,
use drugs to help
mhm.
me get around that and all
Yep.
that, and also project it onto other people and like
Mhm.
judge other people of
Yeah,
their choices. And it was really kind of me judging myself and my choices. So I'm
beautiful. Yeah.
projecting myself onto the other people and then judging them.
Mhm.
So I managed to escape out of that. I don't remember how I did that.
Great. Just
Oh, darn
grace.
it.
I know. I don't know exactly either for myself, but I did. And whenever I start to feel judgmental of other people or something, that's a sure red flag that my self-love has slipped. And
Uh-huh.
I need to, look inside to see what's
Mhm.
happening.
What you said, we should underscore about 10 times. It's like when we judge other people, that's a sign that we are out of touch with love.
Yeah,
Period.
especially self-love, because what I know now absolutely is that if you are in a state of self-love, really true self-love, not just covering it up and feeling, I am having a good day, that's always good, but it's impossible to be mean to other people.
Mhm.
Really is. Because your self-love is what is your guiding light.
Yeah.
And so if you see somebody else who's behaving badly, you might feel compassion for them.
Mhm.
And instead of judgment for them, you might still
Mhm.
want to distance yourself. And that's okay,
Mhm.
I, but instead of just being angry and reactive toward their meanness, that just goes downhill very quickly. And
Mhm.
so that's when I know if that's happening to me, I've slipped somewhere. I have to look to see what's going on within my own heart. So
Mhm.
It seems like some of this ties in also with our feelings or our ideas or concepts maybe of God or the divine, because I feel that, and what I've heard from many people's near-death experiences is after you die, you go to a place where you're it seems at first like maybe you're being judged, reviewing your life, and you're showing all this, but really the attitude of the beings that are there or the being that's there is always one of pure, unconditional love. That which we call God or which we call pure universal love has open hands and an open heart to all of life, the good, bad, the ugly. That's the broadest and deepest type of love there is. And the inspiration of that is really what drives me when I open myself to love and I experience more
yeah.
acceptance of the mistakes or shortcomings that I have.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's exactly true. And I don't know exactly what all happens when we die. I've heard all the NDEs and they all kind of sound similar, but I'm not 100% sure because it hasn't happened to me yet in memory. I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah, who knows? But I think whatever we encounter, the way out has got to
Mhm.
start with that
Mhm.
deep sense of the love that's within, that's really kind of transpersonal.
Yeah, I agree. And our culture is based on competition and measuring ourselves against others. And I think that's one of the first things that happens in a child's life. That's the beginning of the slide away. I haven't raised a child, but I've held babies. And babies, they're like straight from the place. And
Mhm.
there's this kind of, I don't know, something bliss or something wafting off of them that's quite amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then we lose that gradually, or children keep it for a while, but eventually life gets you, knocks you around. You find out you're not so special. Your parents thought you were special, but maybe nobody else does. The teachers, your fellow students, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and then it just continues. It can continue downhill.
Mhm.
Some, but some of us are lucky. We get it back.
Mhm.
One of the beautiful, most powerful teachings that I got when I did this training when I was a Sufi, learning to be a Sufi healer, and it was a 3-year training. And one of the techniques they taught us, which I used on myself more than anything else, if you're unhappy and you've got something going on that's negative inside yourself, you can ask yourself, what am I listening to? Am I listening to the voice of my ego, which is fear-based, competitive, measuring? It picks up all the societal negatives about that. Or am I listening to the voice of God? In this case, it doesn't have to be theological. Am I listening to like the greater, higher consciousness voice? Or am I listening to the darkness? They use the word the devil, but again, to stay away from a theological approach, there's a lot of darkness in the world right now, a lot of evil. bad behavior, terrible things, just even looking at Nazi Germany, you know. So what voices were they listening to? And those voices are still around. What are you listening to? And once you identify what that is, then you make a choice to only listen to the divine voice, the voice of oneness, the voice of love, or to listen to the other two.
What are you listening to? What are you choosing? Do you choose the dark or the light?
Mm-hmm.
What you hear?
Yeah. Another thing that I learned as a Sufi was a life-altering, stunning learning experience. My teacher was a profound Sufi teacher. He was really a manifestation of divine love. And being around him was quite a powerful experience. And he wrote a book called Music of the Soul. And part of the book, he documented the 28 stations of spiritual progress, you might call it. But the very first one was called Listening to the Voices from Darkness.
Hmm.
And it was about how the devils whispers in your ear all these bad things about yourself. And then you believe it. You think it's true because he speaks in your own voice. So you think it's true.
Yeah.
And then the whole rest of the 27 stations are how to move away from that, how to see that as and not being the true reality, because it is illusion. Whenever we go into that dark negative place, it's very much in a state of illusion. And so I believed my negative voices when they told me I was a failure and I would never succeed. And, you know, I had made all these bad choices, and I believed it because I thought it was me talking to me.
Right.
So now one of the things that people are becoming more aware of is don't believe these voices. You don't have to be theological about it. Just don't assume that they're true.
Right.
Because most of these voices come from that competitive measuring mentality, you know, that you've always got to be better in order to be worthy. You've got to be better, do better. You've got to achieve, be successful in all the worldly ways that's recognized. And so the voices are like saying, no, you know, you're a failure. You'll never amount to anything. Well, where did that come from? Really? It came from outside, and then because we see it everywhere, and then you incorporate it and think it's real, but it's not. It has nothing to do with oneness or happiness or grace or any of those things.
It seems like it's a fundamental insecurity that comes from believing oneself to be separate, to be just a little human, a little worm-like human, lost in the universe, you know, with this giant universe. Only that's a position of insecurity to make you feel inadequate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does make you feel inadequate. And since that is actually, I would say, a core wound in society at large, here in our Western society, it's a core wound.
Mhm.
Yeah, that made
Oh,
me think that if you feel inadequate, then you have to turn to others that are not inadequate and do what they tell you.
yeah.
And it made me think
Yeah.
of colleges where you're learning how to follow directions and give the right answer. And like, if you
Mm-hmm.
get this answer, if you get this situation, this is the right answer. And if you don't say it, you're bad. You know, you're
Yeah,
wrong.
right, right.
And
Yeah.
then that conditions people,
Uh-huh.
throughout all that
Yeah,
education process to just follow along, to disrespect themselves and to follow
yeah.
along.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
causes us to really follow authority. You know, we're
Mhm.
seeking love in all the wrong places, basically,
Right.
outside ourselves. And so we want approval from that authority by saying, "Oh, yes, I understand. I'll
Mm.
answer that way, and I'll get an A on the test." You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. But actually it's empty in the long run.
Mm.
Whatever validation you get from that experience runs dry. It's a fuel that won't take you very far. If that's the way to feel good, then you're never going to feel good enough. There's always going to be some way that you don't feel good enough. And that's sort of the setup. That's why I realized that I was listening to that dark voice instead of the voice of love.
Right.
And that voice is available. We just have to go, oh, what am I listening to? No, change the channel. We have to
Yeah.
learn to change the channel.
I want
Yeah.
to ask you a kind of a deep question about all this because you're such an experienced seeker and such a deep thinker and perceiver. Do you think it's at some level all kind of a game that we've chosen to get lost so we can get found, so to speak, if who we are is really, born of divine love, born of the one? Why would we do this? Why would we jump
Right.
into the skin, into this life, into these insecurity creating conditions? Is
I
it is it to have the joy of coming home? What do you think?
That is the ultimate cosmic question that
Yeah.
every spiritual tradition on the planet attempts to explain in
Mhm.
its own way, and some of them have come up with some pretty good understandings, but it is the ultimate question. Who am I and why am I here and why is it so hard?
Why did I choose it? If I
Why
did,
did I choose it? Did I not read the fine print
what
and
was
that?
I thinking?
That's always been my joke. We didn't know. It sounded so glorious.
Yeah.
And we didn't know it was going to
Oh,
suck sometimes. So,
that's
uh,
fine. Let's stop here and read this part.
so I recently came across an insight about that. The Sufis talk about it, the Buddhists talk about it, et cetera, and so on. The Christians have their understanding of it. And I think they all have a little piece. I think of ultimate truth as being like this beautiful diamond that's cut into millions of facets. And the facets all sparkle and pick up the light. And that facet is sparkling, it's picking up the light, but it's not the whole diamond.
Hmm.
That's how I've come to understand it.
That's a beautiful analogy. It really is.
As all of these traditions are trying their best, to
Yeah.
understand this.
Yeah.
It's very hard to think about, hard to talk about. It's
Yeah.
hard to
Yeah.
talk about it in a way that makes sense to you coming out and for other people to hear it in a way, or for you to hear them hearing it the way you meant it, and you don't even understand it that much yourself. That's why there's so many different schools of thought.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't all agree, but they all have a certain amount of validity. I can understand where that thought came from and how it could be useful to somebody, but some of those thoughts were not useful to me. I had to search in other places, to look at the other facets that picked up the light. And some of them spoke more to my being. I think this is why people choose different religions. I had to choose them all.
Yeah.
It took
So,
longer that
so
way.
what do you see that was in common though from amongst all the different paths that you immersed yourself within?
Um,
Hmm.
Now that's a deep question. I think for me, the Buddhists and the Sufis have a lot in common. And you wouldn't think on the surface that they did, because the Buddhists are a non-theological tradition. There is no concept of God at all, or no divine.
The Tao or the way.
Well, Taoism is a little different than Buddhism,
Oh,
but
is it? Oh, sorry.
yeah. But the Sufis on the surface are very theological, and everything is about God and, connecting with God. And whether you're a Sufi traditional or a traditional Muslim, they're both, right in that same spectrum. But those two traditions, Buddhism and Sufism, both have a lot to do with self-compassion and self-love and divine love, and ultimate compassion is what the Buddha was capable of when he became enlightened, and he talked about the suffering, and the Sufis talk about the suffering, and the path out of the suffering is very similar. I think the concept of Jesus in Christianity might be seen as a very positive path of love, because Jesus came to bring the love to the Hebrew people 2,000 years ago at a time when they had lost that. And their religion was about slicing and dicing everything. And so it's not that now, but it was back then. And so Jesus came to restore the love.
Mhm.
And of course, we know it didn't work out so well for
Well, he did ultimately, so they would say that he transcended all of it, right?
Yeah. But nonetheless, even after he died and was said to have resurrected and then ascended, that then became a positive thing, in Christianity. And I think they lost the sense of that along the way and made up a lot of heavy duty rules.
It was taken over. I
very
mean,
true.
Roman Catholicism was Roman, first of all, and
Rome.
Rome was the ruling force. It was ruled by violence and authority.
It was. And so a lot went wrong with that tradition. And I hope I'm not really offending Christians who are listening to this. However, this is just my experience and how I've come to see it. So I think a lot of paths start out well, and then they get, co-opted and corrupted, and they lose some of the original inspiration that was at the beginning. And I think that does happen a lot. What's happened in Islam, there's traditional Islam, but then there are always the extremists. In many traditions have the extremists, they have the Christian extremists. And there are Buddhist extremists. There are a smaller amount, but there are Islamic extremists. And the extremists are the ones that have completely lost touch with the original concept behind their religion. The Prophet Muhammad came to bring the mercy to the people. Jesus came to bring the love to the people. The Buddha came to bring the compassion to the people. And if you lose that, then it's a terrible loss.
And yet I have to think that it's never completely lost, that every being comes from that and must long to return to that, even if it's not in this lifetime, in some other lifetime.
Oh, of
Other
course.
experience. I have
Yeah,
to
of course. I agree. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. When I say you've lost it, it's a temporary loss on the path. We're on the path.
And some of the greatest awakened beings I've heard of in the past, I can't remember the guy's name, Rama Krishna, was it? That had been a real criminal or a no-gooder or something like that.
Okay.
There's people there's examples of stories of people like that just completely flip from being either extremely depressed and ready to commit suicide or very violent and tyrannical, and they can flip and turn to the truth of love within.
Buddhism, there are a lot of stories of the famous lineage masters, and Milarepa is one of the great lights of Tibetan Buddhism, and he was at one point a black magician, and he destroyed villages and stuff. And so there's a whole story about how he got turned around when he met his teacher, Marpa, and Marpa wouldn't accept him until he had cleared that up. And he made him build 7 great pillars of stone and then tear them down and then rebuild them, tear them down and then rebuild them.
Wow.
And eventually, apparently it wore out that negative karma, and he became a very devout student, and he became a very famous Buddhist master. He lived in a cave and ate nothing but nettles.
Well, how do you think that concept of karma ties in with love and self-love and all of that? I mean, it's got a karma meaning, what you put out comes back to you, whether in this life or in another life. How do you think that ties in with love, with self-love? It seems like it has to be connected.
Well, I think we have to kind of understand what karma is actually. I think that within the lifetimes of each person is experiencing, if that's the way it works. I've heard, there are variations on that theme, that who or what is it ultimately? Is it the soul, perhaps, that's the ultimate decider or the director, of all of this? And if that's true, then I think of the soul as being the that piece of divine light that's all part of the oneness that we, we're not really in separation from that, but as separate beings, we forget, that's part of the game of this existence here,
Yeah.
So, and the soul only knows love. So I know that you guys have heard me talk about this one saying. It's a Sufi teaching where God was heard to have said, I was a hidden treasure and I longed to be known, so I made the creation. And I think of us as being part of that, part of God longing to know himself through us and our experiences. And I think it all goes back to that. I've contemplated that one teaching for a long time. It explains so much to me.
Like Eckhart Tolle talks about, there's form and there's space. And so I think of God as being of the formless, the space. And whenever there's an engagement with form, you're always going to get into separation and an individuality. How could it be otherwise,
But if God wants to know himself, it wasn't going to happen with just hanging out by himself.
In space. Yeah, you're right.
You had to figure out this way to create form. And here we all are.
We really get to love each other, So,
here we
see all these beautiful faces around us everywhere and smiles and it's wonderful.
I once heard a teaching. I'm trying to remember where I heard this. It might have been from something Bashar said, who was a ET, being channeled, a very enlightened ET being channeled by Daryl Anka. It's that on the very higher planes, there is no time and no space. It's just all one thing. The quantum physicists talk about this as the quantum field being a place where there is no time or space, and that everything is in a state of infinite possibility. It's always arising. And it's oddly enough, the Sufis talk about this and in a very similar way. And I know the Buddhists, the Tibetans, the Buddhists do too. And they didn't know about quantum physics back then, but it's the same kind of thing. And so if you want to have an experience, well, if there's no time and no space and you want something, it's always right there. So what's the fun of that?
Like knowing how a movie ends before you even start the first frame. It's like, okay.
Right. It's already there, So it's kind of, I remember something that I've listened to a lot of Abraham Hicks teachings online, and people were complaining about, well, when I manifest something, why does it take so long for it to show up in my life? And I want it right now. And Abraham's response was, not as much fun in that as you think.
Yeah. It's by contrast, I think, that we know. So by having the darkness, by having a little bit of pain and suffering and a little deprivation, that we really experience the joy of and appreciation for the good things we do.
Yeah, for our thing. But when I first heard that, not as much fun, I was annoyed and irritated with it. I thought, easy for you to say, Abraham, you know.
What kind of deal is that? Easy for you to say, right? Yeah.
But then I heard Bashar, and I listen to a lot of quantum physics these days, and so I suddenly understood what Abraham was saying, that so it is through our experience of the illusory time and the illusory space, that we get to experience a journey towards something.
What occurred to me just now is like, there's some way it seems like in which we need, or some of us need to forgive God. Like why would you ever set this up that there's a possibility of so much suffering and pain? And so, like my mother, for example, lost two brothers in World War II. And she said at the same time, she lost her faith in God for a while because she really believed that they were going to come back. She felt she was told that. And it's just, and I'm sure lots of people, I'm sure like in that time, in the concentration camps, I'm sure a lot of people began to question their faith in God.
I'm sure they did. That one of the reasons I left Catholicism is that I became very angry at God. And of course, I was very young then. And I went on a spiritual search. And so that was what my whole book was about, my spiritual search. And eventually, though, I loved being a Buddhist because there was no concept of God in Buddhism, and I didn't have to confront how angry I was at God for making such a mess of the world. How could God do this? How could he screw it up that badly? Or how could she screw it up, you
Yeah,
know?
or it or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't until I ultimately went into the Sufi tradition that I had to confront my deep anger at God. And it was very therapeutic. I had one session with one of the faculty members on the healing school in that tradition. And all I did was scream at God and swear.
Wow.
The thing was like, F you, God, I
Wow.
wasn't I wasn't holding back. And it was very therapeutic. And then I realized the absurdity of doing that.
Yeah.
You
Especially if at some level you are God.
Yeah, right. The absurdity of it. And it was very therapeutic, though, to just release that. And then the healer just had me go back into the remembrance practice where you say the divine name of God again and again. And I reconnected with that light, that beauty, that love. It allowed me to heal that split in myself about being angry at God. So I think a lot of people are very angry at God. But the thing is, we don't remember that here in this universe that we live in, we have free will. And a lot of the bad things that happen are caused by human beings because we're allowed to misbehave. We're allowed to drop bombs on each other. We're allowed to kill, rape.
An argument could be made, what kind of a parent would allow their children to be so undisciplined and so
Yes.
looked
Okay.
after that they can, you don't like the brother murders a sister or something. I mean,
Right, right, right.
a good
But
parent wouldn't allow that, right?
it's all an illusion, see?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
It's all an illusion
Yeah.
that this is actually happening. Uh,
Well, that's another question that I think is a very deep question that a lot of people are asking these days. Is this whole thing a simulation? Is it a
yeah,
dream? And there's some evidence that supports that. I mean, that we're finding it like in physics or even in
yeah,
spooky
I
things
know.
like telepathy, or the ways the ET ships seem to maybe go around the sky and defy rules of ordinary physics and common sense, premonitions. How can all that exist if things just move along like we all kind of think they do in some linear billiard ball kind of way?
Well, that's why I actually really like Bashar because he has some very good way of addressing that and talking about it from a different level than we do. He doesn't talk about the simulation, but he talks about how each person is on their own timeline, and then the timelines, can shift and change, and how that affects people. I think that the simulation that everyone's talking about is the illusion that we've created about what we believe is true. We each have that. If you're a religious person, you believe your tradition is true and you have to live by that. And if you're an atheist, then you live by that. And where we all have this, it's our simulation.
If there really are these choices, then, and it's not just one timeline for Earth and it's looking pretty bad, I'd better go do something to try to help it out, ethically, morally, spiritual warrior. If it's just really more like there's like lots of different choices and it's more like you're going into a library and you can choose to pull out this DVD and watch it, or you can pull out this one and watch it. You can watch a murder mystery, or you can watch a romance, a comedy or something artistic and beautiful. Then it's really your choice. And if you really love yourself and are compassionate towards yourself, you'll choose movies that are happy as they can be.
I agree. I don't watch horror movies or violent movies or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They affect me. I feel like it lowers my vibration or
You think
whatever.
we can let ourselves off the hook as far as that idea that we kind of need to save the world? I mean, if there's really many different worlds going on,
Yeah, right.
maybe we don't have to jump into battle and go to prison or get killed or something, you know.
If I save my world, does that save yours, or are we in the same world?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe
Right.
just go to the world you want to go to, and and realize that we're all equals and we're choosing the worlds we want to go to at some level. I don't know. That seems a little contradiction to the idea of compassion and the bodhisattva, and the rescuer and the hero and all that. What do you think, Seven?
I was just thinking that if you save my world, you might totally mess up this thing I was trying to learn.
Exactly, right.
Yeah, that could be like you set it up so you'd learn some lesson or something. Yeah.
I'll save my world and you save yours.
There you go. So saving your own world. That would be a good title for a book or a movie or something.
Saving
your own world. Save your own world.
And by world, you have to define world, which now I'm thinking, well, world is something that's here. There's something that I'm creating. I'm creating my world, and you're creating your world. We have some overlap.
I have a feeling that it's very much like that.
So. I like that story that God wants to have every experience, and so he, divides into countless individuations to have all those experiences. So, like, I'm sitting here judging something that I interpret out there, something that I perceive and interpret, and but that's just my world, my worldview getting in the way.
Exactly. And it could be at some point that God kind of goes, what was I thinking? Maybe it's a little too hard. Maybe it's time to come home. I mean, like Eckhart Tolle, who's one of the people I listen to the most, probably, he sometimes thinks that maybe the entire universe is waking up right now.
Well, a lot of people do believe that the awakening is happening, that we are in the midst of the Great Awakening.
Yes.
And it's not just here in this planet.
Right.
Or in this species, that it's actually much bigger than that.
Yeah. And those words, the Great Awakening, came to me back in 2020, that spring when all this was going on and COVID and everything. Before I think I ever heard anyone using that expression. So it must be in the noosphere, in the in the realm of the universal mind that we all share at some level.
I think it's like a timeline, because one of the things I've heard from many different ET type sources is that what's happening here on planet Earth, on Gaia, is particularly remarkable because all species ultimately reach this, we hope at least, that it's happening here now. We're reaching a tipping point, more and more people are awakening and coming out of illusion and beginning to see that there is something bigger happening and they want to be part of that. And so all these ETs want front row seats, they want to hang out and see what happens here, And so we're seeing all these visitations and ET channeling and stuff like that. We never saw that before. Those of us who are old enough to remember, the 50s, the flying saucers were the ones that would shoot at you from the sky or, but now they are people who've already made that journey on their planet and they want to come here and watch us do it and support it. They're like rooting for us. Go. And I feel that I, was a first wave indigo, the way that Dolores Cannon talks about it, because I was born in 44. So she says it started in 45, but I'm convinced that I was one of them. And that we came to support that and that I incarnated to take part in the Great Awakening. And I don't know what I've done to support it. I haven't started a movement or, anything big or public, but I think each of us, as we become more awake and aware, that becomes part of the morphic field of humanity. Exactly. Our compassion, our love, our self-love discoveries, all of that, it all grows and grows. The more people who do it, like the 100th monkey thing, So I think that's what I have to offer to the morphic field,
I think you have a great deal to offer, and that this book, when you first mentioned it, I thought just another biography, but no, you're talking about a spiritual journey in which you've gone around the world and stitched together a lot of different traditions. You're like a synthesizer.
Yeah, I am.
It's like a flower or a tree that blooms a little bit later in the spring and then it really produces. And so I feel like you have a contribution that you're making here. It's a great story. I can't wait to read it.
Confessions of a Starseed, my crazy journey toward enlightenment. Well, I would pick that up. That's a beautiful art as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. Okay.
Yeah, we wish you every success with that.
Oh,
And you're taking some pretty serious steps to get it out there in the world. And we hope that this interview or this conversation with you is one thing that helps that happen.
Thank
And
you.
it's been really delightful. And I think we should talk again.
I love having deep conversations about these things, that bring us closer and closer to the Great Awakening. And
yeah.
as we awaken, it enlightens, the field. And people hear it and they go, oh, yeah, I want to hear more of that, And so I think it's good to have conversations like this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Feel very blessed.
Right. Meditation is good and all that kind of thing, and being a hermit all by yourself. But I think that we have so much to contribute collectively to learn from each other, that all
Yeah.
God's children really have a different piece of the puzzle. And somehow we're all experiencing and learning different things, just like we have many lifetimes in which we experience different kinds of lives and different, we might be a man or a woman or a different races or different species, who knows?
Mhm.
But we learn from all of that, the richness of it all. That's how I see it.
Mhm. Yes, I agree. We all end up with our own unique contribution, and it might be just the thing somebody else needed,
And
because
it's maybe just the contribution that we
uh,
give back to the source, really, too. Like,
ultimately so that God can
yeah,
continue
yeah,
to know himself through us.
or herself, as the case may
Yeah,
be.
yeah,
Wow, what a great conversation.
yeah.
I love that piece about the treasure chest. So like God just thought, I'm a treasure. I want to show it or let it out somehow. And so that was part of the deciding to divide.
You know, that's true. And it's funny because you haven't read my book yet. Of course, no one has, but except me and a few editors, etc. But
Yeah.
that was one of the things I started with when I started my spiritual journey, that I had no idea that there was a treasure chest and that I didn't know that the treasure chest was me.
Mm.
And it took a long time to unlock it, get it open, and then to look at it. I mean, that's the whole journey. And that was the analogy I used, Seven. So it's interesting that you said that.
And what better place for God to hide than within?
Yeah, right.
Where it's warm and soft.
Yeah, yeah. And kind of where we can't really see it, like, if anybody ever seen your esophagus?
But
Yeah.
each of us is a treasure chest.
Yeah.
I
It
love that.
is.
I want to think
And
about that more.
yeah,
We have amazing bodies. I mean, you might, say, okay, I don't like these freckles and this and that, but
yeah, right.
there's so much beauty and functionality to it all. We have so much to be grateful for.
We do. We do. I think the human body is pretty much genius, creation. I listen to what Greg Braden has to say about genetic fusions and things like that, and he talks a lot about it. So about the
Oh,
astonishing aspect of it. It didn't evolve over time, It
right.
was very special thing. So yeah, we have a lot to be thankful for, and I do appreciate that. Mine is wearing out a little bit, but I feel grateful that I'm still hanging in there. I have all my marbles, and
Mhm.
I have these moving parts that are still
Yeah.
moving.
And you land on your feet. We all land on our feet eventually.
Right.
Or inside our hearts, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and we all live in the desert. And you told me at one point that when you were writing your book, you came across this interesting analogy of the spiritual path as likening to what it's like to approach a cactus. Can you say more about that?
I didn't plan to write that. It was just stream of consciousness, and I started typing, and it all came out about being
Oh,
with the
oh.
cactuses. And the cactuses, though, here's the thing, they're full of juice. They're very juicy and they contain water, but you have to go through this horrible prickly stuff to get to the juice. And that is so much what the path is.
Have you ever quenched your thirst out of a cactus?
I never have. I didn't want to deal with
Yeah.
those pricklies. And so here's the funny thing. So then it hit me as I was typing um, that the cactuses in the desert where we're in the high desert, make these spectacular flowers, especially the swallows. Have you ever seen swallow blooms? I mean, they're
Yeah.
these huge flowers, kind of trumpet shaped, you know.
Mm,
Ah, and then these little prickly pears make these gorgeous bright red and bright pink
mm,
and yellow. And here are these like prickly plants, you know. How do they do that?
mhm,
And Alice Bailey, who was one of the great mystics, you know,
mhm.
back in the 30s and 40s, she channeled all this material. She said that her information was that flowers are the saints of the plant kingdom
Wow.
and that diamonds are the saints of the mineral kingdom.
Hmm.
And
Mm,
then we have, of course, our human saints, you know. But
mm,
I feel very much that flowers are our saints, that there's something about flowers that just when I see them, I light up. It's like I love flowers. So it
mm,
could just me in my fairy lifetime coming
mhm.
Well, and there's another subject that might be a good one to pursue in another conversation is
through.
can we have or would we want a world that's more paradisical, full of flowers and all the kinds of good stuff, pretty much only, or do we really kind of want to have a little bit of this
Mhm.
spice drama, like
Yeah.
that we seem to want it because we have it. I mean,
We have it. I mean, we
yeah,
have
so,
free will. We could have created a Willy Wonka world, and maybe we did at a certain time.
Mhm,
That whole Garden of Eden
yeah,
scenario.
yeah, right.
But
mhm.
then it became boring, you know. They
I
Mm.
wanted to
know.
spice it up, so they ate that fruit they were supposed to eat, and here
And
we are.
I still regret
Yeah.
back in the winter of 2019 to 2020 saying to Richard, I'm kind of bored.
Yeah,
It's like, and then look what we got. All kinds of world drama and COVID lockdowns and things we never thought possible.
yeah, really. See,
Exactly.
you were the one that was
I
all
know.
your
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Sorry.
no.
Yes.
Don't do it again. I'm sorry. I live in.
Well, sure makes a great story. I sure have been, when I'm in the right frame of mind, I love the whole story of everything that's been going on in the world for my entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it is a
9/11 and all, it's like,
really, it's a fascinating
yeah.
story. It's been going on for a long, long time, longer than we can imagine, you know?
Yeah. Seven were in New York at 9/11.
Yeah,
Oh, that would be an interesting story to hear
Wow.
about.
Oh my gosh.
that
Yeah.
was amazing and confusing. And I knew right away that, wait a minute, there's something going on here.
9/11.
You didn't
And
buy it. Yeah, I
yeah,
bought it. I
I,
didn't know until
yeah, I
later.
was looking through binoculars at
Oh,
tower and I saw these little pieces of debris falling off and I
Uh,
looked closer and they were people. That was
oh
oh,
like
my God.
it was really
Oh,
a shocking moment.
oh.
yeah.
But
I
when it fell from my point of view, I just was sure that it was being taken down by some strange
Yeah.
technology.
yeah, it was. I mean,
And
all these people have come out and proven that now,
yeah.
you
We were
Mhm.
know.
about 10 minutes away from boarding a plane in Buffalo, New York,
Oh my.
when it came down and I had a dream earlier that morning before it happened with this big mushroom cloud and the message is head west, like get out of there. So we went right for the rental cars.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
There's like as many as 1 million people I've heard that've had premonitions of it. So what does that say
One
about
of my daughters had a
all
dream
that,
premonition. Mhm.
I had a weird premonition too. Yeah, I had a dream. I woke up at around 5 in the morning in California time,
Mhm.
and I woke up in this state of blind rage.
Wow.
It's not so typical for me to wake up like that. Didn't know why I was. It was right
Angry.
before it happened, and it was surge of rage that I
Wow.
realize now years later that that had to have been tapping into something in the world, you know, because I things were going well in my life and I wasn't
Mhm.
angry, you know, or anything.
Um,
It was just really odd that I
yeah.
woke up like that, you
I had
know.
the same kind of thing with my dream. I thought I was just, having a good time. We were just, in this bed and breakfast and I woke up and what the hell is that? You know, where's
Uh-huh.
that come from? What's that about? I don't think it's personal.
Yeah, yeah. I was puzzled. I had no idea. And I didn't know what had happened because I don't watch TV much. And I was new in being a Sufi. And I had a friend call me and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, why wouldn't I be? I mean, everything seems fine." He said, "Turn on the TV."
Yeah, yeah,
So I did. And I was new at being a Sufi. And then everybody blamed these Muslims,
right.
raised Muslims, and turns out none of that was true,
Yeah,
really. None of it was true, but they needed a scapegoat. It's like, hey, look over there, those guys. Well,
right.
don't look at us over here while we're doing the real bad stuff.
You know, it seemed to be an inside job or partially one. I got involved with some groups that were exploring all that. And then
Yeah,
questioning everything. I started questioning the 2004 election. And so it was easy to question COVID when that happened. At this point now, I'm questioning that whole idea of saying those guys are the perps, you know, or who did it, who done it, you know, was it the ETs, you know, was it the, you know, was
right,
it
right.
Cheney, was it, you know, it's like ultimately deeper than that. It comes down
Yeah,
to very deep metaphysical questions about who we are and who's in charge here anyway.
yeah. What kind of world are we
Yeah.
helping create?
And it's this is great for another top another time.
Yeah, another talk. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's a deep thing, I
Yeah.
think. About what is the ultimate nature of reality and how are we participating in it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the whole simulation question,
Yeah. It's coming up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again
Thank
for
you.
talking with us today, sharing your heart and sharing your journey, your immense wisdom. I think that you stitch these things together better than just about anybody I've ever heard, honestly. I
Thank
mean
you.
that sincerely.
Thank you. I've had a lot of practice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you guys. All right.
okay, sweeties.
Okay, all right. I'll see you guys later.
Thank
Yep.
you. That
Bye
was
bye.
great. Thank you.
Bye.
Beautiful.
Bye-bye.
For more information about Samaya's work and a link to her website where you can have a consultation or become a client, look in the link below. Thank you for watching. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe, hit the like button and the notification button to get more of this kind of a deep look at the lives of people living in these times, pursuing a spiritual orientation to understanding who we are, why we're here, and what's going on. Thanks. And if you like this kind of content, these deep conversations, open door, open mind, open heart looks at people's lives and what's going on in the world today from a spiritual point of view, then please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you.